This is the last Tuesday in April, and I'm tickled that I get to spend it with you. So good to be with you folks. Let's start with the first question sent in to us by a reader from, actually I don't know the location. She says, I understand that expectations can hurt a relationship, but what about expectations like respect and support for one another? Aren't these basic things that are understood as an important part of a marriage? This is so seductive. See, the law of choice says that everybody gets to make their own decisions. Everybody gets to make their own choices about what they think, what they say, what they do, and that it's wrong, it's controlling of us to have expectations of other people about what they should do or have to do to please us. Because the minute we start going down that road, then we don't have partnerships anymore. We don't have relationships with people. We pretty much hold them hostage. When I expect you to give me something, other than in a contract, I give you $6 and you tell me that you're going to give me, half a bushel of apples. Well, I have a right to expect that you'll give me that. But as soon as in a relationship I start to expect that you'll give me something, we're not in a relationship anymore. We start trading, we start buying and selling, and then it's endless disappointment and manipulation and hostage taking and scorekeeping, and it never stops once we head down that road. So expectations are just the kiss of death in relationships. And there are so many ways that we try to justify and rationalize them, like this. So what about the good expectations? Like respect. And we say it with tones of reverence. Well, respect. That's such a good and reasonable thing. And support for one another. And then we add the sacred relationship. And respect and support in marriage, of all things. Now, mind you, I'm not mocking you. Because this is what we do. This is what almost everybody in marriage does. I'm just trying to show everybody how easy it is to head down this path. I'm actually defending you, trying to show how easy it is for us to do this. So we say, respect and support in marriage. So it's so easy to justify our expectations. But man, this is death. I mean, and yet easy to do, because this is, after all, why we get married. The whole reason we get married is so that we can find somebody who will consistently, reliably do what? Give us respect, support, caring, sex, companionship. That's why we get married, is to find somebody who will give us those things. But respect and support are just synonyms for what? Love. And so what we're really doing is expecting our partners, when we expect support and respect, we're expecting our partners to love us. We're expecting love. And as soon as you expect it, then when you don't get it, you will be disappointed, irritated, frustrated. It is a formula, virtually a guarantee, for bitterness, disaster. These expectations for support and respect are why we get together in marriage, and when they're not fulfilled, they are also the why marriages break up. So, the real reason, the best reason to get together in a marriage is that we make a commitment that we will learn to unconditionally love our partners. That's the real reason to get together in a marriage. And boy, once we make a commitment to that, rather than constantly looking to our partners for, well, why don't you respect and support me? As soon as we make that our goal, I can tell you that all the times that I've become irritated at my partner, it's been because I've thought, why don't you? How come you didn't? It's been my expectations. I can just tell you that's the problem. And as I counsel couples, that is almost invariably been the root of the problem. Expectations that one has had for the other that weren't fulfilled. Whereas when we make it our goal to stop and think, so what can I do to be more loving? I've seen very few conflicts caused by that question. How can I be more loving? I've seen very few couples fight over, well, I want to be more loving. No, I want to be more loving. That's not a problem. Here's somebody who says, I've been married for a little over 6 months. My husband revealed to me the weekend of my birthday a month and a half ago that he loves me. But he's not in love with me and he doesn't know if he wants to be married. Now, I'm going to just pause here and I want you to notice something you say here. He revealed this to me the weekend of my birthday. Now, the only reason that you would throw that in there, that he told you on the weekend of your birthday, is to show that he was particularly insensitive to you on your birthday. Oh, how could he do that? Now, why would you do that? So that you could be more of a victim. Now, all I'm pointing out is that already in the first 2 sentences, you have a tendency to want to be victimized and to make him wrong. Just so you can see it. I'm not telling you what you should or should not do. But it's important that we see what we do before we can make different choices. He told me that he felt pressured into getting married from me and from our families. I definitely can see how he felt the pressure from me. Oh, now see, great. So first you acted a little bit like a victim and now you're telling the truth. That you pressured him a little bit. That's wonderful. We'd been together almost 5 years by the time he proposed to me, and to be honest, I'm surprised that it even happened now, looking back at my past behavior. Beautiful. You're truth-telling again. I wouldn't have married me, you said. That's great. So many expectations, guilt trips, running away, acting like a victim, and so on. I'm a master. Beautiful. Great truth-telling. Also notice something here. You were together for 5 years, and in the process you weren't married. So with his behavior, what was he telling you? If he was with you for 5 years and didn't ask you to marry him, he was clearly telling you with his behavior that he didn't want to be married. So almost certainly you did pressure him into getting married. And it's interesting, that kind of a side comment, I guess. People who are not married often say that they're just as committed to each other as those who are married. And that marriage is just a piece of paper. But don't believe that, because I see this pattern over and over again. If marriage was just a piece of paper, well, then people who weren't married, who've been living together for a long time, wouldn't hesitate to get married. But they do. And once people who have not been married get married, things start to be different. They really are afraid of that extra level of commitment. When people are not married, they realize that with really almost no difficulty, they can walk out. There's a sense of, there's a lack of responsibility to being able to just walk out the exit door at any time. Whereas with marriage, there really is an extra level of commitment and responsibility, and it frightens people. Now, notice, I'm not telling you what to do. You or anybody else. If you're not married, it's up to you what you do. But it is a level of commitment and responsibility that many people are frightened of. You continue. Now we are married, and he has been in counseling to help him figure out what he wants. It really did change when you got married. As well as helping him deal with depression that he's been experiencing. He's gone to 4 sessions, and last week he said that he put counseling on pause because he has a lot of information that he needs to process. This is a common rationalization. So after 4 sessions, what he's doing is running. This isn't processing. He's afraid. He's discovered something in the he doesn't want to change. In the process of counseling, invariably, even the worst counselors get to the place where eventually they have to tell you at some point that there's something about you have to change. And when people leave counseling after only 4 sessions, what they're saying is, I ain't going to change. I want to stay the same. And so they say, well, I need a break. No, they don't want to deal with what they're hearing. And so what he really is afraid. Then you continue. As it stands, I'm in a marriage that could potentially crumble at any time. That is sexless, parenthesis, his decision. He says that he's not attracted to me, that he just doesn't have a sex drive, and I'm at a loss what to do. Now, you mentioned that the relationship is sexless, that he's not attracted to you. 2 possibilities here. One, it could be that he's not attracted to you because he's angry. A decreased sex drive is very often related to anger. I mean, if you're angry at your partner, you pretty much lose your interest in having sex with them. If a man loses his sex drive in today's society, I can just tell you, having interviewed now in the thousands of men, the incidence of there being some level of porn addiction is astronomical, like unbelievably high, 80 to 90% or more. And that may be something that eventually you need to ask him about, not as an accusation, but simply to learn more about him and to be more understanding of him rather than accusing of him. So then you continue. Do I start stacking money away so that if he decides to leave, I'm not stuck with no money, no place to live? That doesn't appeal to me because I don't want to be dishonest. Do I wait around and see what he decides? What if he doesn't know what he wants in a year? Do I give it a time frame? Essentially, what do I do? Well, clearly you've got a relationship here that's terrible and not, doesn't appear to be getting better at any point. And so, I would recommend that you ask him for some time to talk when you're not going to be interrupted. Tell him about all the mistakes you have made in your relationship without referring to the mistakes he's made at all. Talk about your willingness to learn to do it differently and describe to him some of the principles that you're learning that would give him some hope, just the slightest hope, that you're going to do it differently. Because it's not enough just to say, I've made these mistakes and I'm really going to try harder. Because trying harder, doing the same things, is hopeless. But describe to him some of the things that you're learning so that he has some hope that, if you try different or differently, that, it could possibly turn out differently. So, and then you say to him, and I'd be grateful if you hung around to at least see if I can be different. That's how you begin the rest of a new relationship and see how it turns out. You could say, if you want to learn about any of this yourself, you're welcome to. Here's some of the things I've been reading. Here's a website you could go to. But I'm not asking you to change. I'm not asking you to learn what I'm learning. I'm only telling you what I'm learning and how I'm going to be different. And you can be as skeptical as you wish to. All I'm asking is that you hang around long enough to see if I can do this differently and quit being so difficult and unloving. And miracles are possible. I've just seen this happen now hundreds of times. If one partner is willing to be different, very often the other partner is willing to hang around and say, well, okay, well, why not? Because the only reason that usually one partner is angry is because the other one's been unloving and terrible. And at that point, your husband may be willing to participate in real love with you. Who knows? But at least you'll have a chance to work together in a loving way with him. So we'll see how it goes. I got this from a woman whose husband had multiple affairs. And his 2 teenage daughters had been angry at him for how he had embarrassed them by the way he behaved. He was a teacher at their school, for one thing, and he got one of their teachers pregnant. So it was a real drama, in the whole community. But suddenly, one of the 2 daughters left her house, the woman's house, their mother's house, to live with the ex-husband, Fred, the guy who had perpetrated this drama. Well, Fred is a real user. He uses people. He'd had, like I said, multiple affairs, and so he uses women, he uses his daughters, he goes from one affair to another, and now he's using this daughter. So he's already emotionally abandoned his current wife, who just had a child. So he's got this new baby, and he's kind of dumped her and dumped the baby, and now he's lavishing attention on the daughter, buying her things, letting her spend time with the baby, kind of using his daughter like a Barbie doll, essentially. And she's loving this because she's getting all this attention, from this father who's abandoned her, and, who doesn't like to, get attention from a father that she wishes she'd always had. And so the mother, who's writing me, is mad about this and is describing the situation. So now we pick up on the letter from the mother. She says it's been 3 weeks now, and Susie, the daughter, is still over there. You can just hear how mad the mother is, because she's over there with the ex-father, who the mother is, with the ex-husband, who the mother's still mad at. The last time she was here, she took a box of tea from our tea drawer to bring to her father's house. I called her yesterday and told her that while she's here, she can use our food, shampoo, tea, toothpaste, and other supplies. And while she's at her dad's, she can't even bring herself to say the man's name, she can use what he has bought for use at his house. And then she got angry. Susie, the daughter. Well, it's just a box of tea, sweetie. And what you're doing is you're drawing the lines for a battle over a box of tea. You're telling your daughter, listen, when you go from one house to the other, you have to pretty much become a different person. You have to take all your clothes off, leave everything behind at one house, and come over here and assume an entirely different life, which makes the daughter feel like she has to choose sides in this battle. It's really obvious in your attitude, just with me, imagine how your daughter feels, that you resent your ex-husband, and you resent your daughter essentially going over to the enemy. And boy, does your daughter feel this. This is a terrible position to put your daughter in. Then you continue. Then I told her that she was perfectly welcome over here while I'm home, but she was not to come over here while Mary, that's our other daughter, and I are out of town, or not home in general. And then she really got angry. She couldn't understand why I would tell her that I would restrict her from coming to the house while I wasn't there. But I discussed it with several wise men and women in real love, and they agreed that Susie is running and she needs some limits. Well, this is really turning into a war. Rules and limits are to teach children what's right and what's wrong. That's what, limits and consequences and the like are for. But there's no right and wrong involved here. Your daughter hasn't done anything wrong. All she's doing is visiting her own father. There's nothing wrong there, except that it irritates you. So, before she went to visit her father, Susie was your daughter, and she was welcome in your home. And then she went to visit with this awful monster, Fred, your ex-husband, and now she's being treated like the enemy. That's the only thing that changed, was that she went to visit the monster, Fred. She didn't do anything wrong. She was just looking for love from her dad, which is like Hello? Perfectly understandable. So why is she any less welcome in your home? Which is, of course, exactly what you've done, is make her less welcome. You're punishing her. And she knows it. She's not stupid. You can rationalize all you want to and make it about tea bags and well, I'm not in the house, but you're punishing her. Then you continue. She got angry and hung up. I'm leaving town on Wednesday for a week. Susie needs her warm weather clothes for a trip that she's going to leave on this Saturday. I left a message for her last night saying that, as we discussed earlier, she was welcome to come get her things on Monday or Tuesday, but I'm leaving town early Wednesday morning, and I asked her to call me to let me know when she'd like to pick up her things. She hasn't responded. I'm wondering if rekeying the locks would be the most loving way to handle this. What do you think? Now, the first time I read this, I had to be picked up off the floor. If you push this, if you rekey the locks, you may have to get a new daughter. You're going to drive her away because then she's really going to get that you're punishing her. So, for the rest of you who are listening, I had gotten this email several days before. And so I sent this response. Normally, I just answer these emails as I get them and answer them here on the video chat. But this one was so pressing because Mom was about to go out of town that I actually answered it immediately. So I sent the email immediately to Mom. And then I got an email within 24 hours or maybe 12 or something from Mom who said this. She said, I called Susie and told her that I brought this to you and you told me that I was wrong. You said that I was telling her that now that she's with the enemy, she's no longer welcome here. I told her I was sorry for being stupid and hurting her. She said that it was okay. So this is the daughter. She said it was okay. She knew I was trying, and making mistakes is okay. I told her that I loved her, and I would love to see her tomorrow before I leave, and it was up to her. I feel relieved, but I can't stop crying. Why do I have to keep making mistakes that hurt my children? I know that I'm doing my best, but I still leave wreckage behind. Man, this parenting stuff is tough. Well, honey, the only way we have to learn is by making mistakes. And in the process of making mistakes, we can't make them in a vacuum. So we make them with the people who are around us. And the kid who happened to be around you is your daughter. So tough. It's just the way it goes. It's how we learn. And the cool thing is, your daughter gets that. I mean, here she is saying, well, I know you're trying and making mistakes is okay. This comes from the kid you hurt. So, what are you fussing about? Lighten up. Then the next email comes from Mom. And she says, Susie came over for a couple of hours yesterday. It was just like she'd never been gone. Now, isn't that cool? So, listen. So, remember the old commercial, Silly Rabbit? That was the way the commercial went. So listen, silly mother. She never was gone. She was only visiting her dad. So you were just confused. The kid was never gone. It was just a visiting situation. You continue. I told her that although I missed her, I was in complete support of her wanting to be at Fred's instead of here. She corrected me, saying that I was assuming that she didn't want to be here, and I was wrong. So the daughter had it right all along, Mom. So you continue. She said that she has to be at her dad's. I apologized for assuming and confirmed that she was free to do what she needed and was always welcome here. She said that she had always known that only Mom was confused. Now, how cool is that, huh? Because you decided to tell her the truth, that you'd screwed up, that you'd been punitive with her, that you hadn't been loving with her. It was over. She immediately forgave you. She said it's okay that you made mistakes. She goes from Dad's house, comes right over to your house, and you said it was like she'd never been gone. Our kids really don't want to keep punishing us. They just want to feel loved by us, which is the whole reason she's over at her dad's. Now, it may be that her dad is using her. Well, who cares? Who cares whether he's doing it for the right reason? And, it just really doesn't matter all that much. She's going over there to get as much love out of it as she can. And if the love that he's giving her isn't perfectly unconditional, oh, well, too bad. She's going to squeeze as much unconditional love out of him as he can give her, even if he doesn't know how. Next reader says, my husband and I have been married for 5 years. His daughter wants an expensive wedding, and he's agreed to pay for half of it. And I think that's crazy. But he just gives in to whatever she wants, and it's causing a real conflict between us. He fusses whenever I spend money on the kids, but he gives in to whatever his daughter wants. It's causing real hard feelings between us. So what can we do here? So calm down and quit thinking that this is about money or about kids. What the two of you want is to be happy. That's the goal. Don't let anything get in the way of happy. The two of you need to sit down and have a conversation about this subject. And you need to ask each other, what do we want more than anything else? We want to be happy. And how are we going to get there? The one thing that's going to help us to be happy more than anything else is to unconditionally be loving. Yes. And there's a priority to loving. No kidding. There really is. We can't be unconditionally loving to the entire planet all at once. It just can't be done. We just don't have unlimited time. And so that's why it's important that in our marriage we establish our partners as first. Why? Because if we don't establish our partners as first, everything and everybody is going to stick themselves between us, and we're going to end up with nothing. Our jobs are going to get in between there. Our mother-in-law is going to get in between. Our children's going to get in between. The local social club's going to get in between. And then we're going to end up with no partner. Whereas if we put our partners first, if I put my wife first, that's the primary decision, and I make my love for her primary, then we do everything together. We make our decisions, important decisions together as a unit. My love adds to hers, hers to mine. Now, all the decisions that subsequently flow from that exponentially increased love will be greater. We can now make better decisions. We can do more as a couple. We can love everybody around us more. But nobody can get between us. Now, that means that sometimes people are going to come to us and make demands like a child will. A child will come and say, I want this. And I sometimes have to say, well, I may not be able to give you everything you want. And so what? Because loving somebody doesn't necessarily mean giving them everything they want. Loving somebody means caring about their happiness, which means that they feel cared for, loved, loving, and responsible is what makes people happy. All three at the same time. And so simply giving them what they want only pays attention to one of those. They also need to be responsible. They also need to care about other people. So if my daughter comes to me and says, Dad, I'd like $1 million for my wedding. And I go, gee, who wouldn't? But she also needs to be responsible for her own life and pay attention to the fact that if I give her $1 million for her wedding, then I'm going to be stripped naked and I'll be unhappy. Well, that wouldn't be a responsible decision, would it? So it'd be silly for me to give her everything that she wants. And she needs to learn to be loving and caring toward others, which would mean not spending $1 million on her wedding. And so I would sit down with, if I were in your position, I would sit down with my partner and I would say, so let's talk about love, loving, and responsible. The most important thing is that we care about each other and that we come up together with a plan where you and I are most concerned about each other first, and can, as much as possible, care about this daughter who's getting married, but not necessarily give her everything she wants, because loving people isn't about pleasing everybody, because that's earning their approval, and that's just imitation love. So, keeping in mind the first goal, which is you and I caring about each other, what plan can we work out to do what we can to help her? Always remembering the first goal. And if you remember the first one, it turns out that, man, we can come up with all kinds of creative solutions for everything else, as long as we don't let the other goals come first. If the first goal is to please the daughter, then our marriage is screwed. See? So always remember the prioritization of the goals, and that being happy isn't as a result of pleasing people. It's as a result of unconditionally caring about their genuine happiness. If you can remember those two things, your discussion with your husband will go better. Will it go necessarily seamlessly? Maybe not, but at least this will help. Here's a viewer who says, I can't bear it if my husband gets irritated at me about anything. So I'm always trying to do the right thing, which of course means to do what he wants. This keeps me in a state of almost constant anxiety. I'm always trying to please him. Now, I'm sure he likes this, but it keeps me from really enjoying any kind of relationship with him or with anybody else. How do I ever get out of this pattern? It's important that we get the difference between caring about somebody's happiness and feeling responsible for somebody's happiness. There's a huge difference. So when your husband gets irritated at you, what he's telling you is, you are responsible for my happiness. I'm angry because of you. And because, well, that's pretty much how all of society believes. If you walk into a room and you say to any number of people, I'm angry because of my boss, my brother, my wife, my whoever. If you say that sentence, I can virtually guarantee you 99 times out of 100, nobody will contradict you. If you say, I'm angry because of my brother, what people will say is, oh, really? What did he do? In other words, we believe the premise that other people make us angry. And we've been taught this from the time we were little children. So when you were a little kid and your mother said, you make me so mad, without meaning to, of course, she taught you that principle, that we make each other angry. Your father did the same thing, your teacher, your uncles, your grandparents. It's just a universal truth, except that it's a lie. But we come to believe it. I mean, when you're 4 years old and your dad comes up and says, you make me so mad, there's no 4-year-old on the planet who looks up at his dad and goes, now, Dad, I've heard you use that phrase before, and I think it's time that we re-examine the truth of that statement. No 4-year-old would ever have either the insight or the courage, for that matter, to say that to his father, who's, 5 times heavier and, 50 times taller. But it's time that we look at it. It's not true that other people make us feel anything. When we feel empty and afraid as a result of a lifetime of not feeling unconditionally loved, and somebody comes at us and says, I'm irritated because of you, well, we're already feeling unloved. And somebody coming and telling us that we're the cause, we're right at the edge of feeling unloved anyway. And that's enough to just push us right over the edge. The truth is that we believe it because of all that training and because we already felt unloved as a result of a lifetime of not feeling loved. So the real truth is they're angry because of a lifetime of not feeling loved, and we believe it because of a lifetime of not feeling loved and a lifetime of training. So it's really a lifetime of lies and not feeling loved. That's what's really going on. A lifetime on both sides of no love and lies. So it's a lack of love and a bunch of lies. So what do we do to change all this? At some point, it's a matter of a two-pronged approach. You need to sit to learn more about real love, read and talk to people and really get it into your head that you are not responsible for your husband's lifetime of not feeling sufficiently unconditionally loved. And then you need to find enough people in your life, and your husband can be one of them eventually, but enough people in your life, starting on the website, starting in real love groups, starting with God, starting lots of sources, to where you feel sufficiently loved so that when he comes at you and starts blaming you, you don't feel frightened. And you don't feel intimidated to believe the lie he tells. So that then when he gets irritated at you, you don't feel forced to do what he wants you to do, so that you feel forced to earn his conditional approval. That's why you do it. Because you're so empty that in the absence of real love, you feel compelled to earn these little scraps, these little worthless crumbs of imitation love in the form of conditional approval or praise or whatever. Once you get sufficient real love in your life, those little scraps will look silly. But you really can't see them as silly until you feel enough real love in your life. When we're empty, every scrap looks like a full course meal. But then, of course, when we get it, we're empty 3 minutes later. Which is why, like you say here, it just doesn't do you any good, because no matter how much you get from him, you're in a state of almost constant anxiety. And what a crummy way to live, huh? You're always trying to please him. Like you said in your own words, it keeps you from enjoying any kind of relationship with him or anybody else. And that's because you're not in a relationship with them. What you're doing is you're in a buy-sell situation with them. You're trading. And it's not very fun. Here's a viewer who says, my sister is a nice enough person, but I seem to avoid her. In college, we seemed to get along, and we're getting closer, but then one night, her live-in boyfriend and I got drunk together and had sex. He felt the need to tell her. Apparently you didn't. And our relationship went downhill a lot. Over the years, in multiple ways, I hurt her and she hurt me, but for the past 10 years or so, she has seemed open to possibly repairing our relationship. But I can't seem to do it. I have a sense that I don't want to be around her being judgmental. But I'd hate to have us end our lives without our trying to repair our relationship. As each of my 3 kids grew up, my sister would say critical and cruel things to them. Even now, my youngest, who is a college senior at a school in the city where my sister lives, will call me in tears because her aunt has said something biting and critical to her. I get very angry when she does this. I don't like to see my children hurt, especially by someone who says she loves them. I have told my sister that she is being cruel to my kids, and she says she's just being honest. On the one hand, I want to keep my relationship with my sister distant and casual, laugh and have fun at family events, but not share myself or my life with her. I guess I protect myself from the brunt of her cruel remarks, but she's my sister. We have a shared history, and it seems a shame that we can't get over our pasts. I've seen divided families and relationships, grudges held long past the events that caused them, and I don't want to do that if for no other reason than it's bad for me. Well, in that last line, you identified a really good reason to do something about this. Resentments, no matter how we justify them, it was the other person's fault, the other person was cruel, they've hurt my children. We can go, I've heard every excuse for a resentment there is, and none of them are sufficient. Because if it leaves any impurity in our hearts, if it leaves anything that keeps us from feeling loving, then it makes it so that we can't be happy. Resentments are incompatible with happiness. It's as simple as that. You said, she hurt me. Well, people don't hurt us. It's not about us. Frankly, we're just not that important to almost anybody. The truth is that people are just drowning. People are thrashing about in their own emptiness and fear and pain, and in their efforts to eliminate their own pain, in their efforts to fill up their own emptiness, in their efforts as they thrash about to keep their own heads above water as they're drowning, they simply splash us. Their thrashing simply affects whoever is around them. So I would suggest, kind of as we've mentioned a little bit earlier, that you could address your resentment at least a couple of levels. And two, I would suggest, are intellectual and in a heartfelt, loving way. The intellectual one we've talked about. She's drowning. If you were to really get, as you look at her, that she's not hurting you, she's just empty, that you always have a choice. Every time you see her, you have a choice. Each time you see her in a given act, you have a choice to see her as either saying something biting and critical, or you could see her as being empty and alone and defensive and not having the social and loving skills to reach out and say something loving to somebody else. You could see her as being bitter, or you could see her as being pitiable and sad. You could see her as hurting you, or you could see her as being lonely and incapable of reaching out to you. Now, all of these second ways that I mentioned are not more positive ways of seeing her. If you just think more positively, that won't last. Positive lies are still lies. I mean, I'm going to think more positive, kumbaya, that's not going to last, because then when somebody hurts you, that positive thinking is going to go away. No, all these other ways of seeing her are more truthful ways. The truth will last. Nobody gets up in the morning and says, I could be more loving today, but I think I'll be hurtful to the people around me. Your sister doesn't get up in the morning and say, I could be loving to my niece. I could be compassionate and kind. I could lift up her spirits. I could cause her to soar on eagle's wings as a result of my love. Or I could be nasty and critical to her and rationalize it as being more honest. Do you think she ever does that? No. She doesn't even see the first choice as existing. She only sees the narrow, critical, unloving choice. It's the only way she's ever lived. So she's to be pitied, not criticized. So if the woman has never seen unconditional love, then where do you think she's ever going to see an example of it? Think. If you'd like, I can play the music to Jeopardy. Da 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 da. You. No kidding. Because if she was raised in the same family as you, guess where she learned these behaviors? From the same parents as you. So it's not likely she's going to break out of this pattern by herself. And if nobody's taught her about unconditional love up to this point in her life, and if she's doing this with adult nieces and nephews, I'm guessing that she's probably past the age of 20. If after all of these decades she is still bitter and alone and not loving, and nobody's taught her to be loving, well, who's going to do it? Probably nobody. And she's so defensive, it's not likely that very many people would have the guts to ever approach her. So who's left? You. And it's going to take some guts for you to do that. Now, I don't recommend that you walk up to her and hit her on the head with a Real Love book and tell her she needs to read this. But you could certainly, at least now, step out of what would be comfortable for you and make a decision that in the first place, you're going to completely get over this business of her having hurt you. Completely, not just forgive her. This business of forgiving is really kind of a selfish thing on our part. Because in the first place, to forgive somebody implies that we had right to judge them in the first place. But to really see that anything she's ever done has been out of her own emptiness. But to really accept her, to really see her as sad and alone, and go way past that to learning to love her, to spend time with her, to when she makes snotty little comments, completely ignoring them and asking about her, to asking about what she's doing, to genuinely listening to her, to teaching her what you're learning about the mistakes in your life. Tell her about the mistakes you've made with your kids. Tell her about the stupid mistakes that you've made in your life when you've been unloving. As she becomes more comfortable, and you'll figure out when to do this. You'll just feel it. It'll just kind of come up in you. You'll just kind of have this inner whispering. At some point, tell her about the stupid mistakes that you've made with her. Bring up the incident where you slept with her old boyfriend and say, you know, that was just so selfish. It was just so stupid. And you don't need to bring it up with a drum roll and bring it up like you'd bring it up in a therapist's office and, analyze it. You just go, it was just one of the many selfish, ill-considered, thoughtless things that I did when I was empty and trying to fill my life with something that would make me feel better. It was just one of thousands of things that I did. And I sure hate it that it affected you, as I have affected negatively the lives of so many people in my life. Just like that. You see? She's going to see an example of you, of what unconditional loving and truth-telling look like. And that's how you're going to tell her about real love. Rather than reading to her out of a book, she's going to see the sermon of your life. That's what makes a difference with people. Very cool. Here's somebody who says, if the purpose of being in a relationship is to be unconditionally loving, does that not imply that you could be with anybody at all and be loving? Yes, it does, actually. As we become more loving, we discover that we could be in more and more situations and with more and more people and still be happy. The more loving I become as I practice real love, I discover that I can be with more and more people that in the past I could not have been with. I can be in more and more difficult situations that I could not have been with in the past, to the point where I can eventually picture that my happiness could be disturbed by almost nobody. So, yes, that is the purpose of unconditional love, is to get us to the point where we could be happy in almost any relationship. But in choosing a life partner, why would we intentionally make it difficult on ourselves? Why not make it fun and rewarding? So when we're picking a life partner, we would want to choose someone who would also be capable of being unconditionally loving, simply to magnify the amount of unconditional love that would be available to us in our lives. I mean, because all of our lives we're going to be in various relationships where people are not going to be loving. And we're going to be testing our ability to be loving. So when it comes to a life partner, gosh, why would I want to pick somebody who's going to test my ability to be loving 24/7? So, yeah, as I become more loving, I could be with, almost anybody, but I don't think I'd want to test that 24/7. Then you continue. I've been thinking about this because so often I know that I'm wanting some things from my partner that he can't give. I really like having good discussions, for example, about issues, religion, politics, and so on, but this is not something my partner can give me. Hence, this is why I end up being attracted to other men who can engage in this kind of discussion with me. I understand that with real love, I should not be demanding anything from my partner, like having no expectations. I can make requests, but I cannot expect to change the way he is or get something from him that he can't give. If I was unconditionally loving, I would not need to get this from him, as I could love him anyway. True. That's very wise of you, by the way, to understand. How important is it to have shared interests and goals in life? Well, when you're picking out a life partner, having shared interests and goals in life is like spice. It's like flavoring. As long as you remember the most important factors, which are the ability to tell the truth and an interest in being unconditionally loving. The problem is that when people pick out partners, they do it completely backward. They pick out the seasoning first. They're looking for hobbies and foolish things, like people fill out their questionnaires on Match.com, and then they hope that they'll find the love later. Completely backward. And so people look for common interests. They get married based on common interests, then later discover there's no unconditional love, and they're doomed. So if you marry for common interests, you will be miserable, because those don't mean anything by themselves. However, if you marry for truth-telling and the ability to be unconditionally loving, the addition of common interests is nice, it's fun, but really only a bonus. It's the unconditional love that's literally everything. It feels important to me. For example, I'm finding it so difficult, you continue, to live with the fact that my partner cannot share at all in my spiritual search. I can't really share what I'm reading about or thinking about in this area, or go on events with him, and it feels like half of me is not in play in the relationship. If we discuss God or belief or spirituality, I can tell he just switches off, and I get upset with what he says. Like he says, there's no evidence for God's existence, and when you die, you rot, and that's it. Now, see, that's not just a lack of common interests. Not only does he not share your common interests, but he's also disparaging. He's also critical of and dismissive of your interests. And that's an entirely different thing. There are many things that my partner, my wife, Donna, and I, she has interest in some things that I don't have an interest in. But when she talks about them, I am instantly riveted on whatever she's saying. In the instant that she's talking about it, that becomes the most important thing in the world to me. Now, if she weren't talking about it, the subject she's talking about, I wouldn't have any interest in at all. But if she's talking about it, suddenly it matters to me. And I'm not pretending. It really does matter to me. Why? Because it's important to her, the most important person on the planet to me. And if your partner's dismissing what matters to you, that matters. You continue. Is it possible to make this work by somehow getting to the stage where I can be unconditionally loving and not wanting this from him? Well, see, here you're already saying that half the things that matter to you don't matter to him, and he doesn't even care to talk to you about them. So I would answer this in two different ways. If you're not married to this man, and I happen to know you're not, because I know this person. If if you're not married to this man and you're already looking at other men and he's dismissive of what matters to you, I'd get out. I've been through this with just hundreds and hundreds of people, and it just doesn't get better. What you're saying is that you're willing to be in a relationship where you're not being loved, where he doesn't have an interest in what you have an interest in, but because you haven't been sufficiently loved in the past, you're willing to settle with somebody who doesn't really care about you. That's what you're saying. So why would you keep doing this to yourself? Get out and learn more about unconditional love. Learn more about what you really want in a partner, and then find somebody who's willing to just cherish you, care about you from head to toe, care about every word that drips from your mouth like pearls, and I'm not kidding. It's worth holding out for that, rather than be in a relationship where you feel like you're just kind of a bother most of the time. Now, if you were married, then I would say, then you're going to have to work with what you got, kid, and try to see what you can do. Then what you do is you decide, I'm going to find more unconditional love in my life. I'm going to share more with this man. I'm going to be more loving, and I'm going to see what I can work out. And it is possible to change this around. Now, why do I make a different recommendation for people who are not married? Because this takes time. This takes a lot of time and a lot of work. And in most cases, it isn't worth going through all this unless you're with somebody who's in an absolutely lifelong commitment to stick with you during this process. Hard stuff to hear, but you asked. Here's a woman who wrote to us a week ago about a horrible marriage. She'd been married for 10 years. It had been awful for the last 1.5 years. You may remember her letter. She wrote that her husband was an alcoholic. They were separated. He never calls. They fought all the time. They lived next door to his ex-stepmother with whom he had had a sexual relationship, if you remember that. And the ex-stepmother did everything with them so that they were, never together. And I suggested that she take complete responsibility for her mistakes and give him a chance to tell her why he was so angry at her. And she wrote this. I just got this today. She said, I took your advice because I thought there was nothing to lose. Well, otherwise I wouldn't have, I suppose. She said, I went to see my husband this weekend, and on Sunday night we had about an hour and a half with no kids around. I turned to him and gave him my full attention and asked him to tell me everything I had done wrong. It was really hard to listen to some of the things that I had done and hurt him so much. I then repeated it back to him and took full responsibility for my actions. He looked like I had taken a ton of weight off his shoulders. He looked relaxed and happy, and now he's saying, when you come home, when we get back together, not if you come home. I just wanted to say thank you so much. I told him about the books I'm reading and about real love, and he said that when I come home, he would like me to read these books to him on the road trips that we take together. He's open to this. He and a good friend both said that they could see the changes that I have made. I know there's a lot more work to do, but it is working, and having the support makes such a difference. I wish everyone out there had this information. Thanks again. See, what you've done is amazing, and this is all you, kid. You had the courage to be responsible instead of right. Because in your first letters, you were talking about how he was the alcoholic and he'd done all this wrong and he was a horrible person and he was unsupportive, and you did take a little responsibility, but you were pretty blaming of him. And what you've chosen now is to be responsible and loving instead of demanding justice, instead of being right. And look at the difference. Here's this guy who was doing all these terrible things, and as a result of you telling the truth, See, this is what so many people are worried about. They say, if I tell the truth, then I'll just be used more. Well, look what's happened. Now what he's saying is, well, thank you. And you said his whole facial expression changed. And now he's saying, so when would you move back down here? And when we drive places together, would you read this stuff to me? We really want to be happier. We really want to be loved. We'd rather be loved than angry and nasty and bitter and recriminating. And you've given him a chance to do that. So, bless your heart. It took huge courage to do what you did. And it does. It takes courage for all of us to tell the truth. But it's actually, in the long run, easier to be loving than it is to be angry or to use any of these other unloving and selfish behaviors. So I look forward to talking to you all again a week from today, and between now and then, remember, as always, that it's always about real love. We'll see you then.